further to the last video, this did become a little more. It's what we've been talking about is the sort of main example of reorganization of what's typically called capitalism here in our country and its effects elsewhere. The effects are everywhere in several different societies. But what we want to explain here is what will help, particularly with regard to Latin America in this case, but all over, is to explain both the economics of it and why the government had to go underground in the 80s to do what it did to make way for this. When we said in a much earlier video, we explained, I think, rather sort of as succinctly as we could, the development of economic formulas by PhDs in economics at the Chicago School that were designed to reconceptualize the relationships within this, what we call capitalism, but to reconceptualize it in a number of ways. The important thing is this, with regard to Latin America, and since we already made a video about what they've done in Chile, but since we're focusing on this agro-business based here, that's a perfect example of something, turn this down, perfect example of something that's new and unfamiliar and violent to both the planet and human beings. But here's the thing. Why there is actually so much agitation in some, I mean, it's here, it's there, they're trying to use podcasts and things. Like, there have been think tanks trying to wonder how to put a stop to what's taken place. That is, these problems, they're nightmares created by the way in which what we call capitalism was quickly rearranged. And if you have PhDs in economics and you're working on rearranging it, you can just simply rearrange it. It's a very elastic form. And what we talked about with regard to Latin America is that because economics is now a branch of what's called social science, that is, it's not something, it's no longer something that relates to the physical economy, so to speak, and it's the economics that happens through when you make it into a science on blackboards, rather than discuss the structural features of how we want to organize our economy. This is something done in the abstract on blackboards, and it's the placement of economics under the heading of social science gives them this. Their economists are looking at everything sort of scientifically, without any regard for the planet or human life. When they do this, here's the thing. Once that kind of thing is taking place, here's what happens. They have to make way for it, you know. It's not enough that they sort of deceive the public by branding what they're about to do in a way that would indicate it'll increase trade. It'll increase trade, and that it's based on, market principles we're familiar with. But that's not what happened. Otherwise, the government would not have had to go underground. When I say underground, I mean the CIA doing things sort of behind the scenes and an actor playing the president, and doing something that was setting the stage, particularly in Latin America, for something being designed on blackboards. They had to make way for it. They also had to remove any blocks to deploying it, because this agro sector that's that big and that millions of dollars of public money that could go into any number of things is being used to subsidize a gigantic agricultural sector that works so closely with the state. We mentioned it. Look, it's sort of it's like what they wanted to do in the Soviet Union, but better. First step here is this, okay? Because we subsidize it, they can artificially lower the prices of these agricultural products they're selling, or that they're going to be importing into countries. They can artificially lower the price to the point where no one could compete with it. How can you lower the price? What can you do that? Well, a capital formation that's involved with the state and has access to public funds in the millions, right, subsidizes it in order to bring down the prices so it's so cheap no one can compete with it. No farmers can compete with it. No other area that is makes their living in the business of growing things, no one could compete with such a thing when the prices are artificially lowered with help by millions of our tax dollars funneled through the state into this new kind of capital formation. Now, that's like sort of step one. The prices of the products are so they've made them incredibly cheap. The next step, okay, is you have to, and it's what they branded free trade, create contracts that have the status of a treaty. That is, it's not really it has the status of a treaty, okay, and these are contracts that are drawn up by a very specific sector that's operating in the transnational arena. Doesn't matter that it's based here and that the theories they're using come from, graduate department in Chicago School of Economics. The fact is they're operating transnationally, so that sector is sort of unrelated to the investor class or the stock market or the businesses here. It's doing things. It has offices in Geneva and Brussels, and it's sort of above what we consider the economy. The contracts are drawn up, they're actually protectionist. Ironically, they're protectionist. They protect this sector that is not even really part of our country, although the corporation is based here, meaning we could stop it. Okay, the agreements they draw up, what they are is that they're going to remove any limits on, going to open up the markets of South America. They want them opened up to our imports, and they want totally removed any limit on foreign direct investment into the country. That is, there is no limit to what degree this agro-business can penetrate into their market. That's new. That's brand new. That means they've called for the removal of controls on the amount of foreign investment that can go into a place, in this case Latin America, and they've changed the rules to take millions of tax dollars to drive down the prices of the crops we're producing. Once those agreements are signed, markets are opened up in Latin America, and start importing these incredibly cheap, genetically modified, crappy agro products into a place where there's millions of farmers. That's basically the economy of that place. They're farmers. They're growing crops. None of them can compete with something like this. It's designed that way. The formulas demand that the markets be opened, no limits on what kind of imports can be flooded, the amount of imports flooded in, and we subsidize it to make them that cheap that millions of farmers simply are put out of business. They have nothing to do. They can't compete with them. They're going to starve. Not much to do. Okay. But what makes way for it? Is, hey, so, well, wait a minute. I mean, Latin America, in this case, really Mexico is where it starts. So why would they, in what way would they just allow this to happen? I mean, are capital formation making agreements that they can just make demands like that, open up the market, flood in imports, them destroying the entire economy for the people who grow crops there? How can they do such a thing? I mean, what allows it? What allows it is this. Prior to doing this, which was done in the 1990s, This is what set the stage. Actor called Ronald Reagan plays the president. The CIA is doing all kinds of things, and there's someone sort of playing the president, talking about markets and things that are sort of abstract. The government's real activity is underground in Latin America, and what they're doing is establishing military bases, okay, and carrying out they're working closely with the paramilitary forces of dictators in Latin America, okay. They're involved with these people, our CIA. And what they're doing is they're murdering, they're assassinating, is a better word, they're assassinating and terrorizing anyone who could potentially form an insurgency against this kind of hostile act by a gigantic capital formation, which naturally would happen. So farmers would ally with, labor leaders and priests and anyone who would attempt to protect the workers and farmers from this assault into their economy. Okay, paramilitary forces working with the CIA, murdering people all over Latin America to make way for this thing, and establishing military bases to keep an eye on the place to make sure they can prevent any domestic insurgency against what this giant agro sector based here is going to do. With that in place, they sign the trade agreements. Markets are open, no limits on it, on what can be flooded in. Cheap agro products flood in. Millions of farmers starve. Millions of farmers starve, so them try to flee over the border here. Okay, that's one of the operations of this thing and what it's capable of doing. Some new kind of capital formation, new kinds of contractual arrangements that are brand name so the public doesn't know what's happening, designed on blackboards to basically destroy an entire economy. Millions of farmers starve. That's one thing it does when it goes to Latin America. That's called free trade. It's a brand name for that. More to come.